Question. Hello, I see that the book of Enoch is not infallible and is not the complete message about fallen angels. The book of Enoch is a book, it's not in the Old Testament, and it talks about there were angels that fell. People in the Summit Lighthouse, including the messengers, took the book of Enoch literally and believed that fallen beings called the Watchers will never be forgiven. Never be forgiven. Can God ever be unforgiving towards anyone? And the book also says the Watchers will never be able to return back to heaven, etc., etc. And this, I think, caused both the messengers and people in the organization to be hard-hearted towards even those fallen beings who were open to the spiritual path. I'm seeing right now that the book was given the way it was to create a desire in fallen beings to change. This is the image I'm seeing that Sanat Kumara, the Ancient of Days, and the God of Enoch had taught Enoch much more in-depth things. Enoch obviously was conscious of the conscious you, and Sanat Kumara did teach him this to him, that the conscious you can return back, but not the fallen being, because the fallen self has to die. But for some reason, the Summit did not have this clear awareness. To be honest, I feel love from Sanat Kumara as I write this, my inner proof of what I have said above. I know I cannot create this love that I feel. Well, so basically the book of Enoch, it's a very old text. It was way before Jesus. I can't remember when. But the thing is, it was given in a time where people thought in more black and white terms. And even the Summit Lighthouse, as I've actually said in another video about the Summit, was a Piscean Age organization. And some of the culture there was affected by the Piscean Age, by things that people had to overcome in the Piscean Age. And one of these things was what I call black and white thinking, where I see right and wrong and nothing in between. So, yeah, I would tend to agree that the organization presented the book of Enoch in a more black and white term. And if you think about it, and this is something I thought about when I was in the Summit Lighthouse, because I could sense that this whole idea of fallen angels, there was importance to it. It was important to understand what it meant. But the question was always in my mind, the book of Enoch talks about there was a war in heaven, and some of the angels rebelled, and Michael fought them, and they didn't prevail, so they were cast down. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer? And the devil came down to you having great wrath, but because he knows he has a short time. So my question was always, how could a being in heaven fall? How is that possible? And I couldn't understand it. I couldn't resolve it. And as the person says, there was no resolution of it in the Summit Lighthouse, because what was given there was given for a certain level of consciousness. And so what the masters are given through me is a whole wider teaching that goes way beyond this. It's part of progressive revelation. And I have summarized it in my video about how the world was created. So if you're interested in this topic, you definitely need to watch that video, because it gives much more depth than I'll go into here. But basically the idea is that our world of form was created in a succession of spheres. And that a sphere is created in an unascended state, which means there is room for beings in the sphere to exercise their free will. And that means they have the potential to fall into the duality consciousness. And that can only happen in an unascended sphere. But then there have been 6 spheres before ours. We're in the 7th sphere that was created in our world of form. There have been 6 before us, and they have all ascended. And when a sphere is at the ascension point, because the vast majority of beings in that sphere are ready to ascend, then there can come a point where there can be some beings that are not willing to transcend themselves, to let go of what they've created. They've created, for example, a society on a planet that they feel is very sophisticated. They're not willing to let go of it in order to ascend. So then the sphere ascends, but those beings fall into the next sphere. And that totally resulted for me Then I understood. And that's why the masters, to me, are generally talking about fallen beings instead of fallen angels, because people think angels can only be in heaven. And so that confuses a lot of people. That's why it's easier to talk about fallen beings. Also because once you've fallen, you're not an angel anymore, because an angel is a being in a higher realm. So, but there can be, still you have to be a little bit subtle about it, because the masters have also explained our sphere has 4 levels. There's the purely physical, there's the emotional, the mental, and the identity. And then beyond that is the spiritual realm, which is the 6th sphere, and then up towards the creator. So, when our sphere was created, right, there were beings that were meant to take physical embodiment like we are. But there were also beings that were created to serve in the emotional, mental, and identity realm. And so here's the deal that has happened over time. You look back in time, and people had a more primitive view and understanding of the universe and the world than we have today. For example, in medieval ages, medieval times, people believed the earth was a flat disk, there was a dome above it, and the earth was not very big, so the dome wasn't very big either. So that means, basically, if you climbed the Mount Everest, you would stick your head through the dome, and you would see, oh, there's God and the angels sitting there. Of course, back then, nobody climbed Mount Everest. But anyway, so what I'm saying is that they had a more primitive view that any being above the physical is either an angel or a demon. They're either higher or lower. But as I said, some of these beings that were created to serve in the emotional, mental, and identity realm, they were still in an unascended sphere, which means they could also go into duality and fall. And therefore, you could say, if you use that old-fashioned definition of angels that was prevalent at the time of Enoch, the book of Enoch was written, you could say that angels fell, if you define it that way. So that's why you have to be a little bit subtle about the words. You can't be too hang up on the words. And that's why I agree with the person, it's important not to take the book of Enoch literally. It's in fact important not to take anything literally. There's always a deeper meaning. So, okay, so that was a long-winded explanation, but to go back to the point here, that fallen beings called the Watchers will never be forgiven. And that's also it's this black and white Piscean mindset that you can see in the Old Testament, for example, where God is the angry and condemning God. I will smite your enemies, and you shall burn forever in hell, and this and that. So that was the more black and white. Jesus actually came to give a more a whole different view of this as the loving Father figure instead of the angry God in the sky. But the Summit Lighthouse still has some elements of that black and white thinking. And so the way I see it is clearly that everything is up to free will. Everything is a matter of free will. But there's always the consideration of the free will of the many versus the free will of the individual, or a few people. So that's why I said there can come a point where a sphere, the vast majority of the beings in the sphere have brought the sphere close to the ascension point. There's a small minority that don't want to transcend, so they're allowed to fall. Right? But if you think about this logically, why are they allowed to fall? What's the purpose of allowing them to fall? It is to give them more time to basically experience what you can experience in the duality consciousness until they've had enough of it and want to come back. So you see, if you take the book of Enoch, why didn't God just wipe out the angels that rebelled? Why allow them to fall? And the logical answer is to give them time so that their free will could come to a point where they consciously choose, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to go deeper into duality. I want to move back towards oneness. And that's when the Christ consciousness is right there, helping them overcome the illusions that gradually bring them back to oneness. Now, for some of these beings who fell, some of them may have fallen in the 4th sphere, it's a very long road. Because, as I've explained before, it's kind of like when you go into duality, you go into a maze. a labyrinth. You can't see very far. So you often, you go in, you come to a fork in the road. You have to choose that one or that one. So you choose that one. Then you go in, you come to another fork, and you choose that one. So you're creating this very complicated path that you have taken in the duality consciousness. And for each time you take a turn, you're making a decision. You are accepting an illusion, or you're creating the illusion. And in order to get back, you have to retrace your steps. And for each time you took a turn, you have to come to see the illusion you accepted and consciously let it go. That's how you free yourself from it. That's how you learn, and even how your I Am Presence learns. So the purpose again is, even if you fall, you can still learn from that, but you only learn when you go back and consciously undo the illusions. I am not this, I am not that. And there are beings, as I have explained in my video about how the world was created, who don't want to do this. The conscious you decides it doesn't want to do it, and then the person is dissolved in what's called the second death, and the conscious you merges back into the I Am Presence of that being, which of course has never descended from the spiritual realm and therefore isn't destroyed by the conscious you going through the second death. And of course all the disqualified energies are then requalified. So, but then there isn't a learning experience. I've explained this actually in several videos. So yeah, I agree that everything is up to free will. That's why beings can fall without being destroyed. And any being can come back. But in order to come back, it has to consciously choose to abandon its present sense of self as a separate being. As a being who might even think it knows better than God. You can basically say it this way. Our Creator has created the world of form. It has certain principles, certain laws, certain ideas that are the basis for the world of form. Then these spheres have been created, and beings, ascended masters, have created these spheres, including ours. And they had certain principles, they had a certain vision. So we start in this sphere. We start as a new being. And basically our purpose is, well, it's kind of twofold. But what our purpose is, as I've said before, we start seeing ourselves as connected beings. So we can say, oh, what am I connected to? Oh, I'm connected to a higher self. I'm connected to ascended masters. And when you increase your connection, you gain gradually an intuitive feeling for how the world was designed, why it was designed the way it was designed. You are basically discovering the design principles that were used to create the world. And that's how you become better at fulfilling your role as a co-creator. But in order to ascend, you also have to deal with free will. You have to experiment with your free will. And one of the things you can do with free will is you can go into what I call the consciousness of separation and duality. And so we all need to experiment with that to some degree, to the point where we come to a conscious understanding of what it is, and we choose, I don't want to go into this, or I've had enough of it and I want to get out of it. We have to consciously leave it behind. And so there are some beings who, in order to do this, they need to go into fully immersing themselves in a duality consciousness, where they lose their connection to their higher selves and the ascended masters. And they come to completely identify themselves as separate beings. And that's what the fallen beings have done, but there are also many people in this unascended sphere who are in that state, many people on earth. They are not all fallen beings because they're in duality. So, so what I'm saying here is that in duality, you have lost your connection to your higher self, to the ascended masters who can show you how the world was designed. Instead, you go into a state of mind where you think you know better than those who designed the world how the world is designed or should have been designed. So instead of discovering how the world works, you are creating a mental image based on the duality consciousness of how you think the world works, how you want it to work, how it should work. And then you are trying to project that image upon everything. And that's the essence of the fallen mindset. You are creating a mental image of how the world should work, and you're trying to project it upon the world. That if the world stubbornly refuses to live up to it, although within certain boundaries you can make it live up to it, because, as I said, the universe is a mirror. But the question really is, when have you had enough of trying to define how the world should work, that you are willing to go back to the path of discovering how it actually does work? And at the moment you do that, the Ascended Masters are ready to help you walk that path up through the maze, your personal maze. But it does require you to realize and acknowledge and admit, oh, I don't know everything. I'm not the smartest person in the universe. And that's what some of these fallen beings think, that they know better than God, and some of them are trying to prove God wrong. They're, for example, trying to prove that it was a mistake for God to give beings free will because it's going to cause them to be lost. And so they are trying on Earth, for example, to get as many people to go into this, like warfare and all kind of chaos, to prove that free will only leads to disastrous results. And of course that can only happen because people go along with them. So everybody's having a learning experience that the duality consciousness doesn't work because they can only create suffering. But the question is, when does a being come to that turning point where it says, enough, I've had enough of this. I want to come back to oneness. And so the fallen beings have been given quite a lot of latitude in going further and further into duality. But the moment they do turn around, the masters are right there. They don't condemn them, they don't judge them, they are just seeking to help them overcome their illusions. But of course what you can basically say is, it's not difficult to overcome the illusions of duality, because they are dualistic. And once you understand duality, you can always see that any idea in duality has an opposite. And therefore it can't be the ultimate truth. So, but until you see that, you are thinking that your dualistic idea is absolutely right and absolutely true. And this is the ego's dream of absolute security in this world. And it's you can say fallen beings have gone deeper into this than many others, but it's not that the dynamic is different for a fallen being than it is for anybody. You basically have come to admit that your ego doesn't know everything. And then you reach for that knowledge from the Christ consciousness, from the Ascended Masters, from your higher self. But of course, the deeper you've gone into duality, the harder it is to admit that I don't know everything. Because you basically you can say, when you go into the fallen consciousness, you start judging. And you are judging that you are absolutely right, and everybody who's different or opposes you, they are wrong. So the more judgmental of a mindset you get yourself into, what's going to happen when you admit that you were wrong? Well, you're going to judge yourself as harshly as you have judged others. And that can be difficult to bear. So that's why some of these fallen beings, they just keep going deeper and deeper, because they will not look back, they will not look at themselves, saying, could it be me? Is it me that's the problem? Not everything out there, not God. Is it me that has to change? And so, I understand there's a dynamic. It's more, in that sense, more difficult for a fallen being, but it's the basic principle is exactly the same. You just have to admit you don't know everything, your ego doesn't know everything, and you want to reconnect to the source of true knowledge, the Christ consciousness.